So greetings to all. From here, I am here in Houston, Swami Atmarupananda, and I'm going to speak this morning due to the kindness of Swami Atmarupananda-ji on cultivating an enlightened mind, Buddhist meditation techniques. So let me begin with a chant, and then I will launch into the talk. Om na brahma loke na cha deva loke na yaksha gandharva manushya loke lokasya jati jarapaneta vande ham api tvam vibho. That is a Sanskrit, the beginning of a Sanskrit hymn to the Buddha, addressing him as neither in the Brahmaloka, nor in Devaloka, nor in the world of the Gandharvas, Yakshas, or in the world of men, has there been such a one as you who removes the pain of birth, old age, suffering, and death. O thou vast one. I offer my worship to you, O Vibho, O one of vast extent. So this morning, this evening, here it's morning, there it's evening. So for you in India, this evening, I'm going to speak on Buddhist meditation techniques. And first I want to give some context so that what I say about actual techniques will be of some greater usefulness if we have some context. So first of all, why should we as Vedantins take an interest in Buddhist meditation? For one thing, of course, the Buddhism grew out of Hinduism. And so there's a great deal shared between Buddhism and Vedanta. Philosophically, there are stark differences, and I'll mention just a few as they pertain to meditation in a bit. But there are some stark philosophical differences. However, in the field of technique, in the field of yoga, in the field of the actual practices of Buddhism, there are many similarities because it grew out of the same soil, out of the same philosophical, mental, spiritual soil. And there was a great Christian mystic named Meister Eckhart, a German Christian mystic who lived in the 13th and 14th century. He spanned those two centuries. And he said that any two genuine spiritual ideas must have a point of harmony. Otherwise, one of them at least is not genuinely spiritual. That any genuinely spiritual ideas must have some point of harmony. It may be hard to find the point of harmony, but there is a point of harmony. And so there is a use for us as Vedantins to be aware of Buddhist techniques, because for one thing, every tradition has specialized in something or some things, some fields of spiritual endeavor. And so Buddhism specialized in mindfulness meditation. And so I will speak at length about mindfulness meditation as well as other types of Buddhist meditation. And that is something that we as Vedantins can find very helpful in our own spiritual lives. If we see the point of harmony, as I'll explain, the starting point for mindfulness meditation in Buddhism is quite different from our starting point. But if we see the technique from an experiential standpoint, then we'll see how to practice it within a Vedantic context. So the Buddhism, as we know, grew out of the soil of India. And there's some scholars, especially Western scholars, who love to analyze and love to separate, love to find distinctions, categorize, etc. They say that Buddhism grew more out of the Shramana tradition, which gave rise to Jainism and Buddhism. But the Shramana tradition seems to have been a large society-wide movement. Even now in Hinduism, you find a tension, not a conflict, but a tension in some in different religious groups within Hinduism, different sects, a tension between the path of the householder, where one fulfills one's duties in the world, and the path of the sannyasi. And so there are some traditions which emphasize the life of the householder and say that the life of a sannyasi is a life of escape, and so it's better to be a householder. There are other traditions which emphasize the life of a sannyasi, and then some like ours which say that both are paths towards spirituality. And so the Shramana movement in ancient India crossed the Jaina, Buddhist, Hindu divide. And so, yes, the Buddhist emphasis on monasticism, on the life of a shramana, of a monastic, is certainly there. But it was not something that was outside of the Hindu fold. It was very much the tradition of the shramana was very much a traditional phenomenon, as later the tantric movement within India, which affected Buddhism, Hinduism, Jainism, the Sikhs, the Vaishnavas, Shaivas, everyone was affected by the tantric movement. So the Shramana movement was not anti-Vedic. So there was the Buddhism had the Shramana influence, but then Vedanta has that as well. Swami Vivekananda used to say, he spoke often of the tragic separation between the heart of the Buddha, as he would say, and the intellect of Shankara. That, of course, doesn't mean that Buddha had no intellect or that Shankara had no heart, but the emphasis on compassion in Buddhism and the penetrating intellect of Shankaracharya. I think, because Swami Vivekananda spoke of this separation and how it was a tragedy for India, I think that part of Swamiji's mission was to bring these two back together. And he embodied both in himself, the tremendous heart which wept for the masses and the penetrating intellect as well. And so to my thinking, Swami Vivekananda, in tune with the great Vedantic and larger Hindu tradition, was one who assimilated the whole of India's past and showed an underlying unity to it. Not just between the heart of Buddha and the intellect of Shankara, but I think as we go forward, we'll find that more of not the Buddhist philosophy so much, but Buddhist technique will be brought back into the Hindu fold. India has always had a synthetic genius and a genius at assimilation, finding the truth in ideas and absorbing them. That has been part of India's genius and is part of the genius of the Vedanta tradition, where they absorbed the logic of Nyaya, the cosmology of Sankhya, the techniques of yoga, and even many ideas from Purva Mimamsa, the six pramanas, etc., and other ideas. So Swami Vivekananda began that process of embodying within himself the unity of the Hindu and Vedic tradition. So there is value to us studying Buddhist meditation because of harmony can be found, and also because, as I said, there are certain areas where Buddhism specialized, and we can gain from their experience. So before getting into meditation techniques, let me say a few words about problems that we Vedantins often face when studying Buddhism. One, of course, is very well known. If one knows anything about Buddhism, one knows the Anatma Doctrine, Anatmavada, the idea that there is no self. So Vedanta starts by the assertion of the self. That's the one thing that you can't doubt. Because if you doubt that you are present within the doubt. So but that's the starting place of Vedanta, and the starting place of Buddhism is saying that there is no self. And once you realize that there is no self, then you are free from the miseries of samsara. So one problem we have to face is the Anatma Doctrine. Another is the fact that in Buddhism, consciousness is not seen as reality. Consciousness in Buddhism is a compound. And one of the reasons why Buddhism is popular in the West is because they see consciousness much as Western psychology sees consciousness. Consciousness is a compound. They don't separate consciousness as the awareness as an absolute reality, reality itself, Satchidananda, the Chit aspect of Satchidananda. They don't see consciousness as that. They see consciousness as conscious mental processes. And so consciousness is a compound made up of conditions. Consciousness is present when certain conditions are there, and it's absent when those conditions are absent. And then a third thing, which is we have to deal with in studying Buddhism, is their idea that sarvam kshanikam kshanikam, everything is momentary. And so in Buddhist thought, you find an idea very strange to us Vedantins, and one which we couldn't agree with, is that even nirvana is momentary. Buddha didn't say that. But Buddha said, sarvam kshanikam kshanikam, everything is momentary. And so later Buddhist philosophers said, if everything is momentary, then nirvana must be momentary also. It's like the idea of samadhi as a mental state in yoga. That is the same wave rising moment after moment that gives the sense of continuity during samadhi. Not nirvikalpa samadhi, when you have gone beyond the mind, but prior samadhis where the same wave rises. So even nirvana is momentary. So these are some of the problems we have to face when studying Buddhist meditation, because as we'll see, they figure into the purpose of the meditation, the orientation of the meditation. And so if we want to learn from the techniques and use them within a Vedantic framework, we have to find that point of experiential harmony, which is outside of or in spite of the philosophical context in which they are taught. So it's important to know also that in Buddhist meditation techniques, there is the original teaching of the Buddha, the original record of the Buddha's teaching. That record is sketchy. There's the mistaken notion that the Pali record in Buddhism is original Buddhism. No, Buddha didn't speak Pali. Buddha spoke a form of Prakrit. Pali, and I learned this from a professor at the University of Calcutta, professor of Pali and Sanskrit at the University of Calcutta. So, but since then, I have found that this is generally recognized by scholars. The Pali was a constructed language, an invented language. The different Prakrits were taken, and Pali was sort of a generalized form of Prakrit that was developed for liturgical or for Buddhistic purposes. So the Buddha never spoke Pali. And the Pali canon was only written down several centuries after the Buddha's time. So the idea that Pali Buddhism is original Buddhism, that's not any longer accepted. So the original teaching of the Buddha, we can make out some of it from the Pali record and from other records as well, but it's somewhat sketchy. But in the original Buddhist teaching, there's several things that we can learn about meditation. Oh, wait, let me step back for a moment and add something else in here. So as I said, there is the original teaching of Buddha about meditation. And then there is the Theravada, the Southern school of Buddhism, their teaching on meditation. And then there is the Mahayana teaching. And in Mahayana, you have a number of living traditions that have different ideas about, or have different meditation techniques. So Buddhist meditation is vast, and I can't cover that in an hour. I want to give some practical information about Buddhist meditation. So I will go very briefly over sort of the historical context and then get into some of the actual practices, a few of them. So first of all, in Buddhist meditation, or in the Buddhist path, we all know of the Arya Ashtanga Marga, the Eightfold Noble Path that the Buddha taught as the path to enlightenment. And there, the very first step in the path is samyak drishti, right view. Because if you don't have the right understanding, the right view, the right thinking, then how can you proceed? And so there's something very practical for us Vedantins. And it's something that we use. It's not something we need to learn. It's just something to be aware of, that we use a great deal already. In fact, people criticize Vedantins, us Vedantins, many times for talking too much about spiritual life. But the reason why we talk about spiritual life, give lectures on spiritual life, classes, etc., is because a great deal of spiritual life, including meditation, is founded on correcting our thinking. Why do we see the world the way that we see it? Why don't we see Brahman? Largely because of our thinking. Largely our way of perceiving itself is based on false ideas. And so there's a very fundamental place for correcting our thinking. So samyak drishti, retraining our thinking. And then there's samyak sankalpa, which comes in the Eightfold Noble Path, making the right motivation. And so later in the Mahayana Buddhist tradition, they gave extreme importance to this, but they called it the arising of bodhicitta. Bodhicitta, the rising of the enlightened mind. That doesn't mean the mind which is already fully enlightened, but the mind which has the right resolve, the mind which is dedicated to finding enlightenment, not just for oneself, but for the welfare of all. That's part of the Mahayana, fundamental to the Mahayana path. So samyak sankalpa, the right motivation, is seen as extremely important. And again, that takes the form of the cultivation of bodhicitta, the enlightened mind in the Mahayana path. And then comes samyak karmanta, right action. That is fundamental for the path of meditation as well, because it includes shila, or moral training. And also it includes the cultivation of wholesome states of mind and the avoidance of unwholesome states of mind. And so these are all things that we're familiar with in Vedanta, but it's important to know that these underlie the practice of meditation in the Buddhism. And then there's samyak vyayama, right effort. So this includes what they call indriya samvara, that is the control of the senses, And so all of these things, again, go into the practice of meditation. And then from the earliest days, from the time of the Buddha and continuing, great emphasis was given to what we in English call discursive meditation. So now there's yogic meditation, where we focus on the object of meditation, one-pointed ekagra meditation. But discursive meditation is very helpful in developing the ability to internalize the mind and to withdraw the mind from the senses. Discursive meditation means you take a theme and you think about it in a disciplined way in order to drive the ideas that you're thinking about deeply into the mind. So a Buddhist would meditate or would take up discursive meditations. For instance, meditations on the filthiness of the body. You find Sri Ramakrishna in the gospel talking about the body being just a sack or a bag of filth. So why should you feel attracted to another body or to your own body? That's just a sack of filth. And so the Buddhists had meditations on that, where you would think of the different aspects of the body and how it was nothing to be attached to. So this is, again, a part of getting samyak drishti, getting the right view, the right motivation, the right effort, etc. All of these things are cultivated by these discursive meditations, thinking in a disciplined way around a subject. Because until we can do that, how can we hope to focus the mind on a point? How can we hope to bring the mind into perfect, calm, tranquil, ekagra, one-pointed meditation, if we haven't first learned to think in a disciplined way on one thing? The mind is by its very nature dynamic. It's active. It's jumping all over the place. So the first thing we have to do is to tether it to a limited activity in a disciplined way. And then from that, we can go to one-pointed meditation. So there are also discursive meditations on death, in which you thought about how death was standing over your head with a sword in hand, ready to cut off your head. And one after another, you would think of different aspects of death in order to give you the sense that death could come at any moment. And so why am I wasting my time? Why am I not seeking enlightenment if death could overtake me at any moment? So again, this is something that we do in Vedanta, but it's good to be conscious of what we're doing and to know what we're doing and why. For instance, that's why Shastra Charcha, discussing the scriptures and all of that, is important in the Vedanta tradition, because it's learning to do this discursive meditation, thinking around a subject in a disciplined way, controlling the field that the mind is covering to a specific field, and within that operating in a disciplined way. Then the famous Brahmaviharas, which are shared between Buddhism and yoga. They're done differently in the two, but the Brahmavihara meditation was taught by the Buddha himself. And that is meditating on Maitri, Karuna, Upeksha. Oh gosh, what's the other? Maitri, Karuna, Mudita, Upeksha. Maitri, friendliness towards all beings. In yoga, it's connected to thinking of being friendly towards the good, being sympathetic towards those who are suffering, etc. But in Buddhism, they use these, they universalize these, to think of friendliness towards all beings, then to think karuna, to think of the suffering of all beings and to develop compassion towards all beings within the universe, realizing that everyone suffers. And then mudita, developing sympathetic joy of being happy at the joy of others, not being jealous, not being envious, but happy when we see others being happy, not thinking, why are they so happy? Why can't I be happy? No, being glad that others are glad. And then upeksha, which is necessary to remove the attachment possible in all of these other states of emotion. Upeksha meaning indifference, non-attachment. So that my karuna is not personal, my mudita, my maitri, friendliness, is not personal. It's based on non-attachment. So these are wonderful meditations, again, which are used in yoga as well. And as you find if you study Buddhism, that there are many, many crossovers between the yoga tradition and the Buddhist tradition. Much of the same terminology is used, tweaked in different directions for different purposes, according to their different philosophies. But you can see from the same, common terminology, vast commonality of terminology for related things, if somewhat different in philosophical context, but related things, the tremendous influence between yoga and Buddhism. Western scholars have tended to say that the Buddhism came first and that influenced yoga, but that there's no evidence for that. Yoga, you find, developed in the Upanishads and developing in the early part of the Vedas. And so it was certainly pre-Buddhistic. So discursive meditations were used in order to discipline the mind and bring it to a state where we could concentrate one-pointedly. So the Buddha taught an integrated approach to meditation in which one sought both tranquility and insight. This is important because later Theravada teachers and commentators, they separated the two. They divided it into shamatha meditation, which was for shama, for bringing the mind into a tranquil state, and then insight meditation, vipassana in Pali or vipashyana in Sanskrit, bringing the mind or cultivating insight into truth. And so they separated the two and said that the Theravada commentators said that you cannot attain to enlightenment through shamatha meditation. You can only attain it through vipassana, insight. And that's why mindfulness became more and more important as a meditation technique in Buddhism. But in the original teachings, you find that was not the case, that the Buddha taught meditation as giving both tranquility and insight. And meditation should be cultivated so that we get both tranquility of mind and insight into the truth. So it was an integrated path that he taught. But the goal for the Buddha as well as the later Theravada and Mahayana was insight. That liberation, emancipation, enlightenment, bodhi comes from insight. And that we find a similarity with Vedanta as well, because in Vedanta, we have the tradition of meditation, but in Vedanta, there's something else which is needed, not just tranquility of mind. In the Yoga Sutras and the path of yoga, it's a psychological path. And so the aim is to perfect the mind as an instrument. And it's believed that once the mind is perfected as an instrument, then the truth will be revealed. But Vedanta says, no, something else is needed. And that is knowledge. Knowledge is needed. Why was it that the great yogins, you think of Patanjali and other great yogins who followed the path, the distinct path of yoga as opposed to Vedanta, yoga as a separate path, how did they come to the idea that the Purusha is infinite, but there are many Purushas? How did they not come to the realization of the unifying Atman is Brahman? I am Atma Brahma. This self is the infinite itself. There's only one infinite. And when there's only one infinite, as Sri Ramakrishna says, you can't even apply the word one. There's no enumeration possible when there's only one and not a second. Then you come to Advaita. So how was it that the great yogins, they attained to perfect mastery of the mind, but not to the idea of Advaita? It's because it was a psychological path where the aim was to perfect the mind, but Vedanta says, Tattvamasi, that is necessary. The knowledge that you are that infinite reality. And then the Anubhava Mahavakya comes, Aham Brahm, the teacher teaches Tattvamasi, thou art that. And then the disciple realizes, Aham Brahmasmi, I am the infinite. So knowledge is necessary. So coming back to Buddhism, that's what the Buddhists said also, though they weren't seeking non-dualism. They said, but they did say that insight is what gives emancipation, not just tranquility. So again, the Theravada tradition changed the early meditation tradition and separated shamatha from vipassana, tranquility meditation from tranquility and ekagra, one-pointed meditation, from vipassana or insight meditation. But the early Buddhist teaching was more integrated. And so then we come to Mahayana Buddhism, and there we find a very rich development, more expansive than the Theravada. Now the Theravada, they continued the meditation tradition, and their vipassana or insight meditation is very popular nowadays for good reasons, and I'll go over that in a minute. So it's a great tradition, but just in extent, the Mahayana is much richer in its variety of meditation techniques. So they maintained a variety of meditation practices, including devotional practices. Devotional practices, devotion towards not just the historical Buddha, but what are sometimes called in English the cosmic Buddhas. The Buddhas which we have no historical record of, and which don't seem to be strictly historical, but they sort of serve the place that deities serve in Hinduism. It's just that the philosophical interpretation of what they are is different from the Hindu view of what they are. But they serve much the psychological, spiritual, practical use of or place of deities in Hinduism. And so they're the great Buddhas and Bodhisattvas are worshipped, meditated on, and related to devotionally. So they're devotional meditations in Mahayana Buddhism, which are highly developed. They're great visualizations, meditations on visualization. And then they're the more abstract jnana-based meditations as well. Different schools emphasized different types of meditation. For instance, the Chan school of Buddhism in China, which became Zen in Japan. So most people know the term Zen Buddhism, but that came from China, where it was called Chan. And Chan was the Chinese word for dhyana. Dhyana in Sanskrit became Chan, which became Zen. So all three words mean meditation. So the meditation school of Buddhism in China, Korea, and Japan, and great popularity in the West as well. So in that school was brought by Bodhidharma from South India to China. And that became a very, very important school, not just religiously, but culturally in China, and even more so in Japan. And then there's Vajrayana Buddhism with many elaborate techniques of meditation, as well as some abstract jnana-based meditations. So now let me come to some of the actual practices and describe them in practical terms, how it is that one goes about practicing these. So let me take the one which is known worldwide nowadays and has been taught a lot in India. There's the man Goenka, who taught from a Hindu background, who has taught Vipassana meditation, insight meditation, which is more specifically called Satipatthana. Satipatthana in Pali, which means Smriti Prasthana in Sanskrit. Satipatthana, Smriti Prasthana. Smriti, as in Hinduism, smriti is very important. Smriti doesn't mean just remembering the past. It means keeping in the mind, whether it's from the past or the present. And so Satipatthana is mindfulness meditation. And so we've all heard of mindfulness meditation. So let me say a word about what mindfulness is in general before I come to specific techniques of mindfulness. We can think of meditation as having a triad. There's the meditator, there is the object of meditation, and there's the process of meditation. This is a triad we're very familiar with in Vedanta because we have the jnata, the knower, the jnaya, the object of knowledge, and the jnanam, the knowing itself. And then there's the karta, the karma, that which is the karta, the doer, the karma, that which is done, and the kriya, the activity itself. And so we're familiar with these triads of experience in Vedanta. And so in meditation, there's this triad: the meditator, the object of meditation, and the process of meditation. So the dhyata, the dhyaya, and the dhyana. This triad. So there are three classes of meditation depending on which element of this triad you emphasize. Typical yogic meditation, which is present in Hinduism and Buddhism, where you're trying to make the mind ekagra, one-pointed, is emphasizing the object of meditation. You focus the mind on the object until arthamatra nirbhasa, as Patanjali says, the object alone shines. The mind becomes so concentrated that even the sense of a separate self meditating on the object disappears, and the arthamatra nirbhasa, swarupa shunya eva. as if there were no meditator, just the object. So there the emphasis is on the object of meditation. Then we have Neerjasana or self-inquiry, where the subject, the meditator, is emphasized. In that meditation, which was taught in the Upanishads and taught in modern times by great sages like Ramana Maharshi, one seeks the meditator, that is, one seeks the source of consciousness. Who am I? So you turn the light of consciousness back on itself, or you withdraw it into itself. Instead of going out into thinking, etc., you draw it into yourself. And so that is where the subject is important. But there's a third, where the process, the meditating process, is important, and that is mindfulness meditation. So mindfulness meditation takes some field of, well, let me back up and start over again. That the mindfulness meditation is developing a field of awareness. You use an object in order to develop the field of awareness, but the emphasis is on the field of awareness. You're trying to develop a field of alert awareness. You're not focusing on an object to the exclusion of everything else, nor are you turning the light of consciousness back on itself to seek the subject, but you're developing the power of paying attention, the power of alert attention. And so for general practice, and as I'll show, we have this something of this practice in Vedanta as well. But in Buddhism, you take this, for this practice, you take a limited field of experience and you pay attention to it, emphasizing the attention itself, not what you're paying attention to. For instance, the most well-known and most often practiced is watching the breath, breathing in and breathing out, just paying attention, watching the breath as it enters the body and watching the breath as it leaves the body. So as Vedanta and yoga both well know, the mind is spatial. That's a strange thing in traditional Western thought. It was thought that the mind is non-spatial, the body is spatial, the mind is non-spatial. But thought is just as spatial as the body. It's just Chitta-akasha as opposed to Maha-akasha. And so to work on the mind, you have to put the mind somewhere. And so in watching the breath, you either watch it by the touch of coldness as the breath enters and leaves the nostrils, or you put your mind on the diaphragm at the bottom of the chest as it rises to push the air out and lowers in order to bring air into the lungs. So one or the other, that's the place where you watch. But the purpose is not to realize the breath or to become one-pointed on the breath. The purpose is to develop the power of watching, the power of attention. So you breathe in and you breathe out, you breathe in and you breathe out. You're not trying to control the breath, but you just watch the breath coming in and going out. Why? Why focus on the breath? For one thing, because the breath is always there. You don't have to imagine it. So one of the factors in mindfulness meditation, one of the characteristics of all mindfulness meditation is that you don't use imagination, you don't use visualization. You focus on something which is experiential, which is there already, that you don't have to bring into, you don't have to create mentally or whatever, just something which is tangible and existent. And there you just pay attention. So you watch the breath go in and go out. Well, for one thing, as I said, because the breath is always there, it's always accessible. But for another thing, the breath is uninteresting. It's not that while you're meditating on the breath, you think, oh, I remember that wonderful breath I had yesterday. I think that was the best breath I ever had. That was such a delightful breath. I just can't stop thinking about it. No, breathing is boring. Breathing is not interesting. Breathing is not inspiring. Of course, if you stop breathing, then you'll be very inspired to breathe again. But in itself, breathing is not inspiring. That's the point. Meditation, you want to develop the ability to pay attention, not because the object attracts you, not because there's something about it that pulls your mind. You want to develop the power to pay attention because you want to have the power of attention, so that I can pay attention to whatever I want to. Wherever I want to focus the mind, I can focus it there. So breathing is boring. That's the point. That's good. You want the breathing to be boring. So you watch the breathing. And then another part of the practice is whenever a distraction arises, you note it and you name it. And even with your breath, when there's an irregularity in the breath, say you're breathing normally, and then suddenly you, like that, you suddenly have a spasm in the lungs, which happens to us, where you suddenly breathe in quickly. The body suddenly feels the need for more oxygen and you breathe in quickly. So you note it, quick breath. And then sometimes the breathing becomes very slow. You note slow breath. You have a distracting thought. You note distracting thought. That also is important. You name what it is that is happening so that you are aware of what's going on. By naming something, we take some degree of control over it. So this is the basic practice. Now let me talk about the philosophical context in which it is taught in Theravada and why that does not work for us. The practice can be very good for us, but we have to do it within a Vedantic context, or otherwise we're going in two different directions. So the context in Theravada, why do they practice vipassana? They practice it to see that there is no self. I am not a self. I'm just a bundle of tendencies, dynamic tendencies, which are always changing. My consciousness in Theravada thought, not in Vedanta, but in Theravada thought, consciousness as they use it, which is as Western psychologists use it, mental processes, those are constantly changing. So you're watching the breath and you're seeing how every moment things are changing, how every moment your conscious processes are changing, how everything is momentary, and you seek to become aware of the fact that there is no permanent self because everything is changing. Now in Vedanta, that's not what we want. For us, it's fundamental that the self is the permanent reality. It's because of the steadiness of the self that we are aware of change. How do we know change if there's not something against which change is happening? Something which itself does not change. And for Vedanta, again, of course, consciousness is reality itself. It's the still light of awareness. The processes, the changes are in the mind and in the senses, but not in consciousness itself. So whereas a Theravadan practices this in order to see that there is no self and everything is momentary, and there's just breathing, there's just process, nothing but process. The Vedantin might practice the same thing in order to see that yes, the mind is changing, the body is changing, everything is momentary, sarvam kshanikam kshanikam, except for my awareness, which is watching. My awareness is watching. So that's one type of mindfulness. Another type, Swami Vivekananda teaches in Raja Yoga as a practice of pratyahara, withdrawing the mind from the senses. He teaches us, and this is used in Buddhism as well, mindfulness of the mind. He says in the Raja Yoga, to watch the mind, let thoughts arise, let them disappear. Don't try to control them. Just like you're watching, as we would say in modern times, more modern than Swamiji, as you're watching a movie screen, something on a movie screen, all sorts of things going on. Thoughts rise, they play for a time, they set, but I stand back as the witness, the sakshi, and just watch the thoughts arise. And so that is a traditional Buddhist meditation as well as one taught by Swamiji, and a very useful type of mindfulness, mindfulness of the mind. So again, you're not creating thoughts, you're not imagining thoughts, you're watching something which is already there, just watching thoughts arise and set in the mind. And as Swamiji says, that as you watch that and remain detached, I'm not involved in the thinking, thinking is going on of itself, and I'm just the spectator, just watching, the sakshi. As you do that, then the mind begins to settle down, it becomes calm, and then you get the sense of being the uninvolved sakshi. So again, for Buddhists, they're not trying to develop Sakshi Chaitanya because they don't believe in it. They're trying to realize that everything is changing, my thoughts are coming and going, so everything is changing and there's no self watching the thoughts, there's just thoughts arising and setting, that's all that there is. From a Vedantic standpoint, that doesn't make good sense. Of course, Buddhists have their arguments to make sense out of it, but we still don't buy into it. But we can use the technique for Vedantic purposes. Another meditation which I've used a great deal, which is taught in China, and which the beginnings of it is taught by Swamiji in 6 lessons on Raja Yoga. And so I'll have to be very brief because the time is short now in describing this, but it's a wonderful meditation. Basically, what you do is first you sit and you scan over the body, thinking of each part. As Swamiji teaches in 6 lessons on Raja Yoga, you think of each part of the body from the toes, part by part, going gradually up to the top of the head. And you picture each part in the mind's eye as pure, perfect, and full of light. And when you come to the top of the head, you picture the whole body at once. Now, the distinction is in Buddhist meditation, you don't picture the body as full of light, you just picture the parts of the body. You picture them as you scan over with the mind from the toes up to the top of the head. Though actually they go from the top of the head down to the toes. Swamiji says to go from the toes up to the top of the head. Either way, the same thing is accomplished. But then you come to the main part of the meditation. Once you've scanned over the body, observed it, observed all of the parts of the body, brought them into a sense of harmony just by observing them, then you sit and you are aware of the outline of your body, usually with the eyes closed, though with practice you can do it with the eyes open. You feel the outline of the whole body at once. And you're just mindful of the presence of the body. You don't have to imagine the presence of the body. You feel it. It's a direct experience. So again, in all mindfulness meditation, you're not creating something, you're not imagining something, you're not visualizing something. You're paying attention to something which is present. And again, the value of this is developing the power of attention. And so you pay attention to the outline of the body. What does that do if you practice it for over a period of time, day after day? The first thing you do is you find that by feeling the presence of the whole body at once, you feel that the mind is brought into the here and now. Atra adhuna. The mind is here and the mind is now. Usually our thinking takes us to the there and then. We're thinking about things out there and some other time, what happened yesterday, what I'll do tomorrow, etc. But in this, you're brought into the here and now, which is where the only place we'll ever find reality. The only place reality is to be found is here and now, not there and then, because those are mental creations. Here and now is all that we have. And so this meditation, you use the outline of the body. You're not trying to realize the body, even in Buddhism. You're not trying to realize the body. You're using the body as an anchor to bring the mind into the here and now and to learn the power of attention. Alert, still alert awareness. Awake, alert. And what you find with time as you do that is that gradually the mind is fixed still in the here and now, and the outline of the body begins to disappear. Because when you're still, the sense of the body disappears, even though that's what you've been focusing on, is the sensation of the body's presence from the feet up to the head all at once. But then that outline begins to disappear, and then one feels just a mass of presence, a mass of presence. And so from a Vedantic standpoint, that's very useful because you're bringing the mind into the here and now, then the sense of the body itself begins to disappear with some practice. And then you just begin to feel a still presence, which is the intuition, not the direct experience yet of the Atman, but the intuition of the Atman. The sense that I am here, I am now, and there's just presence and no division between inside and outside. This envelope of skin is our problem. We think that I end where my skin ends. Out there is not me, inside my skin is me. But that's an illusion. Why should I think that wherever my nerve endings end, that's where I end? I can perceive the whole universe. Why do I limit myself to the tactile sense? You touch me here and I feel it. You touch something outside of me and I don't feel it. And I think this is me and that's not me. Why should I think that? Why should I think that? So in this way, in this meditation, you begin to feel expansive. The body, the outline of the body disappears, and then there's no inside and no outside. And it goes on from there, the development of the meditation. So again, all of these mindfulness meditations are for the purpose of developing the power of alert attention. How does that help us in our meditation? Say if we're initiated with a mantra and an ishta and all of that, how does that help us? It can be of great help to us because the main obstacles in meditation, there are 4 obstacles mentioned by both Gaudapada and in the Vedanta Sara, of Vikshepa, Alaya, Vikshepa, Kashaya, and the Rasaswada. That is distraction of the mind, sleep, torpor, and delight in the higher states of meditation so that we don't want to go to the ultimate. We don't have to worry about that last one for a while. That one is where we're so delighted with lower samadhi that we don't want to go higher. So when that is our problem, we are very blessed. The problem for most people, the 2 problems for most people are laya and vikshepa. That is falling into sleep and into distraction. And so we try to meditate, we try to do our japa and meditate and visualize the ishta and everything, but the mind runs off in a distracted thought. Or if the mind becomes quiet, then it decides, oh, that must mean it's sleep time. So we fall asleep. By developing the power of attention, then in the midst of that attention, then we can bring ekagra meditation. We can bring focus on japa, on visualization, whatever else we want. But first we have to have the power of paying attention. When the power of paying attention is there, and we can apply it anywhere, to the breath, to the mind, to the body, whatever, to the emotions, to thoughts that are arising, or to generalized mindfulness, where we're just aware of everything that comes into the mind, every perception, every thought that comes to the mind. Then we have the power to pay attention wherever we want. And then again, we can bring that ekagra meditation into the mindfulness mind. And then we can bring a focus. So it's an extremely helpful power of the mind that we want to develop. If we just try to practice yogic meditation where we're focusing on an object without developing the power of attention, then we find that the mind just keeps spinning away, thinking about other things, or it keeps falling asleep. So developing the power of attention is one of the best ways I know of bringing that ability to meditate to us, developing the power of meditation. So again, in Buddhism, mindfulness is nowadays the most famous type of meditation, and it's used both in Theravada and Mahayana Buddhism, different mindfulness techniques. But again, in Mahayana, they have many other types of meditation as well. Let me just mention the koan in Zen Buddhism. That is where you take, well, actually, there are 2 practices in Zen Buddhism. Let me just very briefly mention, because time is almost up. One is the koan, where you take an incident from one of the great Zen masters of the classical period in China, in which the master brought about a crisis in the life of a student, and through that crisis catapulted them into some degree of an enlightenment experience. Not the highest enlightenment, but an insight experience. And so one of the famous ones, the most famous one, is where the disciple asks the teacher, does a dog have the Buddha nature? is the Buddha nature in a dog? And the teacher shouts in Chinese, "Wu," and "wu" means not. So it doesn't mean specific, it doesn't actually have the intent of no, the Buddha, the dog does not have the Buddha nature, because Zen and Chan Buddhism were much closer to Vedanta than most other forms of Buddhism. In fact, they talk about the Buddha nature within everything and seeing the Buddha nature within everything. So Wu didn't mean no, the dog doesn't have the Buddha nature, but it had more the force of stop. So the mind is asking all these questions as the mind does. Or does the dog have Buddha nature? Does a stick have the Buddha nature? Does the sun have the Buddha nature? Useless thinking. And so the teacher says, "Wu, stop." And so then in meditation, you remember that incident. You picture the incident and what happened. And then you focus on Wu, just that single syllable, Wu. And if you read the account of some great Zen students of the past, of the classic age, when they did that, then they said that Wu became like a red hot iron ball. It was caught in my throat. I could neither swallow it nor could I spit it out. It was always with me, waking, sleeping. Wu had become everything. And so again, through that, they attained to a one-pointed state of mind, but a state of mind which was a question, because they were trying to figure out what is the meaning of this statement of the Zen master. But in the process, now let me say that they brought the mind into a one-pointed state where Wu became everything, like you find in yogic meditation. The way of getting there was somewhat different, but the effect seems to have been similar. Let me say that in modern commentators on Zen Buddhism, they say that koans were puzzles given, or are puzzles, because they're still used, are puzzles which are given to students in order to confound the mind so the mind stops thinking and then you're catapulted into a spiritual state. I don't agree with that analysis of what was happening, because the record of students who attained to an illuminative experience through using the koan shows that they weren't just trying to tire the mind out. They were using the mind to focus on the central problem which is presented by the Zen master in the anecdote until that becomes everything. And then the mind is brought to a higher state by that intensity of focus. Day and night, they would think about that problem. And so it's interesting because it was in the form of a question. One other, let me mention, and then it'll be time to sum up and close. And that is and I don't know the correct pronunciation. I don't know Chinese, though I studied it 52 years ago for 1 year. That's not much Chinese, 1 year. Huatou. Practice is called Huatou, or however it's pronounced in Chinese. That's the best I remember. In that practice, you also take an incident from a Buddhist master of the past, but it's in the form of a question. For instance, you take the question, who is dragging this body around? Who is dragging this body around? And so in the Huatou practice, it's very similar to self-inquiry, Atmavihara in Vedanta, because you continually ask yourself, who is it that drags this body around? That is, the basic question is, who am I? But they form it in an interesting way, and you try to feel, who is it that's dragging this body around as I move about my daily activities and so forth? Who is it that's dragging the body? Another question that's used for this same Huatou practice is, what was your original face before your parents were born? What was your original face before your parents were born? Obviously, that doesn't mean this, this ugly thing here. What was your original face before your parents were born? And so you're trying to seek, who am I before even my parents were born? So you're seeking your eternal nature. So as I said, Zen Buddhism, there are many similarities between the spirit of Zen and the spirit of Advaita Vedanta. So it's a type of self-inquiry. So again, in 1 hour, I couldn't give you much encyclopedic view of Buddhist meditation, but I've tried to show you that, first of all, in Buddhist meditation, you have to, as is important in Vedanta, you start with samyak drishti. You try to correct your way of thinking, because perception follows thinking. We see the world that we have thought of. The way we think of the world, that's the way we see it. And so you correct your thinking. You correct your motivation. You have right action. You learn shila, moral principles of acting, how to cultivate good states of mind and avoid bad states of mind. Bhadram karne shrunuyama deva, bhadram pashe makshabhirya jatra, etc. So, and then discursive meditation, where you teach the mind to think in a disciplined way about a subject, and then developing mindfulness, the ability to pay attention, just bear attention. And then with that, ekagra meditation will be much more fruitful. So let me stop here because the hour is up. And I thank all of you for your attention. And once again, I thank Swami Atmarupananda-ji and the RKMVERI, the Institute, Education and Research Institute at outside of Belur in Belur, for this invitation, and for all who were involved in organizing this. And I wish you all well, and I will close with a brief chant. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat. Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu. So, namaste and goodbye to all. Oh, okay, okay.
There's some questions, Maharaj.
Oh, okay, all right.
You read that?
So the first question is, Sakshi Chaitanya is already there inside and outside as an entity, or is it the fruit of meditation generated through a sadhak's continuous practice?
Yes, a good question. So, if there had been more time, I was going to mention that Sakshi Chaitanya, development of Sakshi Chaitanya, is a type of Vedantic mindfulness and a comprehensive mindfulness, where you're not restricting it to the body, to the mind, to the breath or something like that, but just the whole field of perception and thought. Everything that comes to the mind is the object of Sakshi Chaitanya. And so as we practice Sakshi Chaitanya, we're developing the ability of the mind to watch itself. The actual Sakshi, of course, is pure consciousness. And that's what we want to reach. But we have to start by developing the power of the higher mind to watch all the rest of the mind. And so Sakshi Chaitanya starts by developing the power of buddhi. So that's a power which is there, but a power which is not developed. And so we have to develop it, we have to exercise it. But eventually we want to go from that to realizing consciousness itself. So first we have to start with consciousness as we experience it. And as we experience it is consciousness as reflected in the buddhi, the jivatma, which is the jada granthi. So once we get a sense of consciousness by practicing that Sakshi Chaitanya, then of course the goal is to identify with Chaitanya itself, to undo the knot of Chijara Granthi. But that, of course, is at the heights of the practice. So in the beginning, and for a long time, our practice of Sakshi Chaitanya is developing the power of the buddhi. Just one more thing let me say, and then I'll take another question if there is one. Swami Ashokananda used to say, it was a very illuminating remark for me. He said that during the Cultural Revolution in China, great professors, great scientists, great thinkers of the country were taken for re-education and sent to re-education camps where they had to shovel cow manure and pig manure and things like that. And so he would say that, yes, you can make a great professor, a great mind, a great intellect, a great scientist. You can make them do that. Certainly, if you have the authority, you can force them to do that. But is that the best use of a great mind, the greatest minds of the society? Is that the best use, to make them spend their whole day shoveling manure on farms? And so he would say that that's what we've done with the buddhi. The buddhi is shoveling the manure of the senses all day, every day, lifetime after lifetime. So we have to bring the buddhi back to its pristine state and bring it to the state where it functions in itself, not a slave of the senses as it is now. And one of the great ways of doing that is through the practicing the Sakshi Chaitanya. So the goal of that, again, is to identify with consciousness, but the means is developing the power of the buddhi.
There are a couple more questions. So one is,
okay.
How to practice discursive meditation by thinking about daily life objective processes like studying and working, instead of subjective processes like death, which is comparatively difficult.
Yes, yes. So how that can be done. In fact, one of my teachers within the order, you could say an Upaguru, he used to say that in daily meditation, we should spend some time thinking about the, or let me put it a different way. We should spend some time learning to relate the meditative mind to the active mind. And so we could take passages from the Gita or other texts, thinking about the meaning of work and what it is that happens in work, how it is that we work, and what the goal of a spiritual aspirant in the midst of work is to be. Because one of the problems that many people have when they first take up spiritual life, it's practically a universal problem, is, okay, when I'm sitting in meditation, whether it's successful or not, or whether I get any concentration or not, I feel like I'm doing something spiritual. And then I go about my workaday life and I feel the contrast, and it's a shock to go from meditation out into the workaday world, and I can't relate the two. So we have to consciously learn to relate the two. And that is a good field for discursive meditation. And we can do that as a part of our daily meditation practice, our formal meditation practice. And that is thinking about work with the help of texts like the Gita, which is the great text on karma yoga, not just karma yoga, but certainly it's the great textbook on karma yoga. We can think about what the nature of work is, how I should work, and how I should bring the meditative mind to bear on the work that I do. Swami Vivekananda said that I want my followers to emphasize work in place of traditional tapasya. So if we're to do that, then work must do for us the same thing which tapasya was meant to do. Otherwise, we're just working. If we want work to replace tapasya, then the work has to be done in such a way that it is tapasya. So how do I do that? So thinking about these things is just one example.
There are two other questions. One is how to hold on to the attentive state of awareness during mindfulness meditation and avoid dozing off to sleep.
Yes. Well, again, the dozing off to sleep is one problem, distraction is the other problem. And we, depending on the state of the mind at a particular practice session, one or the other will be the bigger problem. So in either way, when there's laya, when the mind goes to sleep, then vijaniyat, then know that that's happening and wake the mind up. So we have to exert willpower to wake the mind up. One of the things to do to help in that process is to get a very clear idea through repeated practice, a clear idea of the difference between sleep and alert mindfulness. Because what happens many times, especially in our early years of meditation, not just the early weeks of meditation, but the early years of meditation, is that sometimes we fall asleep in meditation, and when we wake up, we think, I'm not sure if I was meditating or if I was sleeping. I don't remember. I'm not sure what was happening. I wasn't aware of anything. Was that meditation or was I sleeping? So one of the things we have to do is to get a clear sense by observation of our own minds and what's happening, a clear sense of what it feels like to be alert and aware, and what it feels like when I lapse into laya, into sleep. Or when I lapse into daydreaming, vikshepa, and I start daydreaming about various things. I have to, by practice and observation, I have to get a clear sense of which is what each feels like. And then when I find myself falling asleep, I'll know that, oh, that was sleep. Let me wake myself up. So that's the first thing, is to get a clear experiential sense of what it feels like, what daydreaming feels like, what wakefulness, wakeful attention, quiet attention feels like, and what sleep feels like, so that I can pull myself out of it when I see what's happening. So I don't confuse the two. That's very important to learn, and it takes some time to learn the distinction so that I don't confuse them. I remember in training center, and I don't say this to criticize the person because we were all in the same state when I was in training center, but there was a brahmachari who would, within minutes of sitting down to meditate, we used to have a shrine room in the training center, and so he would sit for meditation, and within minutes he would fall sound asleep. And then 45 minutes later, he would wake up, and then he would get up and he would tell people, oh, I had such deep meditation today. I wasn't aware of anything. I was just not aware of a single thing. And we all knew that he was sleeping soundly by the sound of his breath. So no, we have to learn the distinction, and then to wake ourselves up. And when there's vikshepa, when the mind goes off in distraction, to learn to tranquilize the mind, to bring the mind into stillness. It helps to have some sort of, how to say it, some sort of picture in the mind of, well, let me just say what I have done when the mind is distracted. I just think of bringing the mind, I think in the sort of visual terms of bringing the mind back here. And when the mind falls, lapses into loya, then waking it up and being alert. So it's a matter of exercising the will and knowing which is which.
So if you have time, Maharaj, there are two more questions as of now. One is,
okay. Let me take. Well, I'll try to do two if I can give short answers. Okay.
Yeah. Can mindful meditation follow japa, which may lead to ekagrata or concentration in chanting the name of our Ishta?
It can. I would suggest that it's that, and this is based just on my own experience. So I can't extrapolate from that automatically and say it's what everyone should do. But from my own experience, I find it helpful to do some mindfulness meditation first, and then to bring japa within that. But if you find it beneficial to do it after japa, then that's fine also. Just learn to find a connection between the two, so that the two are supporting each other rather than taking you in two different directions.
And there is this question, is it true that Jnana Yoga sometimes increases ego, the feeling of superiority? I am Sattvic and so on.
That's true of any of the yogas. There is a pitfall with any of the yogas. Each yoga has its own pitfall. With Raja Yoga, one of the pitfalls is selfishness. I'm only concerned about my own meditation and my own self, forget everything else. With Bhakti Yoga, there's the danger, among others, of emotionalism and just wasting all of your energy in cheap, superficial emotions. In Karma Yoga, there's the danger of just getting involved in work. And in Jnana Yoga, there's the danger of thinking I'm God and everybody should worship me. Or I'm God and I am Brahman, and so everybody should respect me. But that's a misunderstanding. So it's not that Jnana Yoga leads to that. It's that any yoga can be abused and misused. And so in Jnana Yoga, Swami Vivekananda always emphasized, remember that you are the infinite self. You are the immortal one. You are the blessed self. And so is everyone else. So is everyone else. So learning to what I say about myself, to recognize that that's true about everyone else. And that is the way to keep that from the ego of the jnani from arising.
There is one further question in the chat.
Okay.
Children and youth today are often succumb to distraction. How do we help them? Do you have anything to?
Yes, that's a major problem. People have always been distracted, but nowadays it's even more than it used to be, because there's so many opportunities for distraction, and apps on telephone, on cell phones, smartphones, and computers are designed to keep people distracted, to keep people involved. So as soon as you watch one thing, it's got something else to present. Well, try this. Well, look here, look there, look at this, look over here. And so it is, the things are designed nowadays. Modern advertising also is designed to distract the mind, to pull the mind out, to capture the mind. So Swami Vivekananda said that if I had my education to do over again, and if I had any say in the matter, I would teach myself to concentrate the mind, because then I could take in facts as I want. And so one of the things to teach young people are simple methods of mental control, simple methods of focusing the mind, and to teach them the dangers of the distracted state of mind. But giving them simple techniques, not asking a small child to sit for half an hour, because small children can't sit still for more than a few seconds. But as children grow, to teach them techniques. That was the idea behind the Upanayana, the giving the sacred thread and teaching the Sandhya Vandana, the Gayatri, etc. So giving some simple technique that young people can use in order to bring focus to the mind, and explain to them the value of it, and show them the value of it.
So thank you so much, Maharaj, for spending so much time. One small observation I want to make here regarding the Mahayana meditation. Once I asked His Holiness the Dalai Lama straight away, what kind of practice do you do? Because in Buddhism, the kind of practice that they do is completely different. So he said, no, it's a secret and so on. Later on, he told us, a small group of people, that the Pratitya Samutpada is a practice that he does. The idea of dependent origination, every moment leading to the other moment and completely exhausting itself, that itself is a kind of practice. So I do not know exactly how Pratitya Samutpada itself can be a practice that way. The continuous momentariness of the movement of thought, that itself is an object of meditation.
That's interesting. I haven't heard of that. Of course, I know of Pratitya Samutpada and a dependent origination, but I hadn't heard of that being used as a meditation. But that's very interesting. I'm glad you shared that, because that gives food for further thought. How he might have done that.
His Holiness Dalai Lama said that's the practice which I do.
That's interesting. I never knew that. Well, thank you, Swami.
So thank you so much, Maharaj. Spending so much time, and it's such a difficult topic. Only you could perhaps do some justice to this.
No, I enjoyed it, Maharaj. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you all for your attention. So I'll offer my salutations and say goodbye for now.
Yes, Maharaj.